So when hormones go high, she's getting this toxic dump. Now, with that, if she also is going into these deeper fasts that are creating a detox reaction out of her cells, she may not feel so great.
What is it that women need to know about fasting? I feel like this is a big topic. You've been educating a lot on this recently. So yeah, let's start there. What do women need to know?
Yeah, it's such a good place to start, because when the fasting movement just accelerated and everybody dove into fasting, we never stopped to say that men and women should do it different. And so what we started to see was that women were really having adverse reactions. And they were things like hair falling out, gaining weight, missing periods, anxiety going through the roof. And you, over time, started to see men going, I lost a ton of weight, I have all this great mental clarity, and women going, I'm not having that result. So the message that got out to the world was, well, women shouldn't fast. And it was like this whole part of the conversation of fasting was left out. And at the root of that is we are hormonally different. So men are driven by testosterone. So when you get testosterone every 15 minutes, it goes up into the brain and converts into estrogen. So when we look at the studies on fasting for testosterone, it's amazing, like 1,300% increase in testosterone if you fast around 15 hours, 2,000% increase if you go 24 hours in a male body.
In testosterone?
In just testosterone, yeah.
Wow.
Like my thing always is, if you're a man and you're not fasting and you want to raise testosterone, you're crazy. What? This is a free source to bring testosterone up. 2,000% increase.
Wow.
In one 24-hour fast for a man.
That's super. I mean, I was aware of the spike that you get in growth hormone, which is like a rejuvenating hormone. Typically, we get that pulse at the onset of sleep, but that's pretty incredible to hear it happens to testosterone as well.
Right. Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. Which, and if you just stay in that lane, we've got such a trend of men getting like testosterone shots and all these supplements for testosterone. I'm not opposed to all of that, but you have a free resource that maybe you haven't even tapped into yet. And I think that's part of what accelerated the fasting movement is men were losing weight. They had better mental clarity. Their testosterone was going up, so muscle was being built more, libido was going up. And the women expected the same thing.
But testosterone plays a physiologic role in women as well, right?
Right. So when we look at what drives a woman, it's estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone. And so we have 3 sex hormones to take into consideration. I'll start with testosterone in a woman, but also know that estrogen and progesterone, even though they look very similar, we call them sex hormones, they actually behave vastly different, and they need a vastly different lifestyle, which is where fasting went awry for women. And we'll talk about that in a moment. But to answer your question, with testosterone in women, it's not just libido, it's motivation and drive. And I think this is really important because as women get into the mid-30s, early 40s, we start to see some shifts in her sex hormone profile. And testosterone actually starts to go down. Now, we do have a subset of women where testosterone goes up because of things like PCOS. But for the woman who's in her late 30s, early 40s experiencing low testosterone, it may be she's not motivated to work out anymore. She's not motivated to get a task done. She's not motivated to resolve an argument with a loved one. So that motivation and drive for women is really important. And we can use fasting in women to increase testosterone. We just don't have enough studies on it. The only study I can find is that it shows around 24 hours, women get around 1,000% increase in testosterone at a 24-hour fast.
Wow, fascinating.
Yeah. So, but that's based off of one small study, whereas we have a ton of studies on men and testosterone and fasting.
Why are there so many more studies in men? That seems like a huge blind spot in science.
Yeah. You're easier to study. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of reasons, but you're easier to study because you only have one sex hormone. Your anatomy is a little bit easier. When we look at women, you would, if you really wanted to look at a woman in the most complete setting in a study, what you would do is you take all the women that are ovulating, all the women that are in their follicular phase of their cycle, all the luteal phase women, and you would separate them out because we are hormonally different every single day of the month, whereas you are hormonally the same every single day of the month.
Yeah, we're just simpler
You're
in so many ways.
Yeah.
Women are so much more complex. It's a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
But I guess it makes studying the effects of dietary and lifestyle interventions, I guess, a bit more complicated.
Absolutely.
Okay, so what then should women fast?
Yeah, so then we go to those other two hormones and you look at estrogen and progesterone. And estrogen loves when you fast. So this would be if a woman's menstruating, this is day 1 till about day 10, her body starts to build estrogen. Fasting is amazing there. So you can do intermittent fasting, you could do a 3-day water fast in that time, and hormonally you're actually going to shine. You're going to bring estrogen into balance. You're going to get rid of the bad estrogen, get the good estrogen really thriving. Highly recommend women fast in that first 10-day period.
10 days after menstruation?
Yeah, so menstruation's day 1, which is actually a really interesting point. Even women don't really know what day 1 of their cycle is. So day 1 is when you actually need to use like feminine care products, and that not spotting. This is like full, like you're actually bleeding.
Mm-hmm.
That's day 1, and you go till day 10, and then ovulation starts around day 10. So now women don't bleed 10 days, but estrogen is building in that time. So
got it. So during that time, day 1 to day 10, it can be very useful.
That's right.
To fast.
And keto's great then, like low carb, you want to keep your glucose down. And estrogen's also very, very forgiving of cortisol. So if you all of a sudden, let's say you're an intermittent faster, you're really good at fasting 15 hours, but you hear a conversation like this and you're like, wait, I want to go 24 hours. Okay, when you first do that, there's going to be a cortisol spike. Kind of like when you first do a hard workout, there's a cortisol spike. So if you do that when estrogen is building in your body, no problem. If you do that same activity when progesterone is building in your body, you're going to tank progesterone. And now you've thrown the whole hormonal cycle off. So progesterone just operates so different, which is why, again, we have to start looking at fasting different.
So after day 10?
Yeah. So then around day 10 to day 15 is when we ovulate. And what's really interesting about that phase is that we have all of our hormones coming in. So estrogen's at her peak, testosterone's at its peak. Now, I want to stop there for a second because this blew me away when I started to break this down. You're getting testosterone every 15 minutes on a 24-hour cycle. It's being pulsed into your bodies. We get it in one blurb of a month. We get a 5-day period where testosterone comes in.
Wow.
Now, you have lower levels throughout. A woman has lower levels, but they're not high. So, okay, let's look at why the body does that. It's all around reproductive and procreation of the species. That when we're ovulating, we're supposed to have testosterone at its peak. But so not only are we more fertile, but we're more motivated. We have more drive. We've got estrogen at that moment that's like making us verbally, I was going to say superior, but that's not right.
Maybe.
Just verbally, very verbally capable. We can multitask when estrogen's in. Estrogen's very extroverted. We're much more outgoing. And we have testosterone that's got that motivation. So that's
when you say motivation, it's motivation to find a mate.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And so testosterone facilitates that.
Yeah.
So it's really that day 10 to day 15 period. If you're a single guy, be on the lookout.
Yeah. Well said.
Super interesting.
Or if you're in a relationship with a woman, if you really want to connect with her, that's the time. If you want to resolve a conflict with her, that's the time. She's motivated. She's verbally ready. She's got a little bit of progesterone, so she's going to be a little calmer. She's very receptive and she's very creative at that time.
Fascinating. Yeah, that makes a ton of sense because it would be maladaptive to have testosterone, I guess, because of testosterone's influence on libido running high all the time in women. But that 5-day period seems like it would be very that's the appropriate time. Yeah. Whereas in men, we're just running high all the time, ready to mate whenever, wherever.
That's right.
Super
Yeah,
interesting.
and if you think about it, like how many relationships, I mean, I've been married, I think it's close to 30 years now. And I started to unpack this and realize like, oh my God, the conversations around sex have to change because when I'm getting testosterone is so much different than when he gets it. And yet when you look at a relationship, a heterosexual relationship, there's this like, why doesn't she want to have sex with me? You hear that from men a lot. And the question I have is, well, when are you trying to have sex with her? And that's a whole nother discussion.
Yeah.
That's not even a fasting discussion.
So it's not smart to fast if one decides to experiment with fasting during that time, that 10 to 15.
Yes. So what's interesting about that time from a fasting perspective is when hormones are high in a woman, she's got these 3 hormones that are coming in, there can be a toxic release that comes out of our tissues. So we know things like heavy metals are stored in muscle and bone. They're stored in the brain, plastics, glyphosate. So when hormones go high, she's getting this toxic dump. Now, with that, if she also is going into these deeper fasts that are creating a detox reaction out of her cells, she may not feel so great during ovulation. So I just noticed this from seeing so many women fast that we saw a pattern right at ovulation where some women did great and some women did horrible fasting during that time. So my recommendation is keep it around 15 hours. You don't go more than that. You won't stimulate a lot of detox if you keep it at 15. And then you have other tools like this is where your work is really interesting for people that have been listening to me is what are you doing for food at that time? Your microbiome is going to break those hormones down. But if you're not eating the right food to break them down, then you're getting hormones, but your body's not using those. So my recommendation is stick with a longer fast and focus on food in that 5-day period. A long fast is not your tool, your hormonal tool at that point.
So what are the main benefits of fasting? Like if somebody listening to this is completely naive to the concept, like why is fasting something that they should consider?
Yeah, this is a great question. Well, I think the best way that I can explain it is your body was born to fast, just like you were born to sleep. So it is a healing state that you're going to put your body into. So the only way you get there into this healing state is with going without food for a minimum of 12 hours. So I'm sure you know this, but your audience, just as a refresher, is that we have 2 energy systems. We have one energy system that operates off the food we eat, and we have one energy system that operates off a lack of food when we don't have food. And so metabolic switching become a very popular concept, at least in the biohacking world, where we're talking about how do you switch from these 2 energy systems and get the benefit of both. So when you put yourself into a fasted state, what you're doing is you're bringing blood sugar down. So you're moving out of the sugar burner energy system and you're clicking over into this new system, which is called the fat burner. I call it the fat burner system. We also know this is ketones, the ketogenic energy system. So what you can only access that by going a certain period of time without food. Once you've clicked over into this new energy system, massive healing happens. So we talked about testosterone. You brought up growth hormone. Growth hormone goes up in both men and women. Autophagy is stimulated. Autophagy is where the cells start to repair themselves. Senescent, aging cells, dysfunctional cells start to be killed off. We call that apoptosis. Your gut microbiome repairs. Your body starts to drop weight at faster rates than we've ever seen. Your dopamine system gets rebooted and your whole immune system gets rebooted. The longer you stay in that fat burning energy system. And the only door in to get into that deep healing state is through fasting.
Wow. And this happens in both men and women.
That happens in both men and women.
Why? I feel like there's been a little bit of pushback, like for women to engage with fasting. I think largely because their hormone systems are purportedly much more sensitive to signals of stress. And fasting, I guess, in a way, is a form of stress.
Yeah. Yeah. It is a form of stress. But I just want to point out, so is exercise.
Yeah.
And we haven't really villainized exercise for women.
That's a great point.
So I do believe that we need to start to redefine the way we look at exercise for women. I feel like a woman should look at it on a 30-day cycle if she has a cycle, as opposed to a weekly. But the pushback, I have like a politically correct answer for that. And then I have my, like what I really want to say about it.
Be as candid as possible.
Okay, so I'm going to start with that.
This is the genius life.
Yeah. Here's what's going on with fasting is people are getting off medications. People are healing themselves. People are able to avoid bad food. So when we look at the two major drivers of financial gain at least here in America, it's big pharma and big food. So now we've created a tool that is free. Anybody can do it. And it can move you away from the damages that big food can do. And it can get you off some of the medications you're wanting to get off of that big pharma is profiting from. So women are suffering more at the hands of our healthcare system than men are. We have a one-size-fits-all healthcare system. So when we started to see fasting work so well for both men and women, and it was working, I mean, women were losing weight and getting better mental clarity, there became, the media grabbing on to this sensational piece that women shouldn't do this. And we are, let's just be honest, we're money makers. I mean, people are making money off of us. And so if we can back out of big food and back out of big pharma, that's a profit loss to multiple systems.
Why do you think women are did you say they're more vulnerable to men?
Than the system the system. Yeah. It's a great question. So one of the challenges we have, and let's use cholesterol as an example. A woman walks into her doctor's office and she all of a sudden gets a blood test and her doctor says, "Hey, you have high cholesterol." Okay, did he ask her at what point of her cycle that she was on? Because in the front half of her cycle, her cholesterol naturally goes up because you need cholesterol to make estrogen.
Wow.
Did we ever ask that?
Yeah, I mean, I've never had a primary care visit from the vantage point of a woman, but that's crazy that they'll just do blood draws at any point in the cycle and then assume that that's reflective of the whole month.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Another good example, I put this in the book in Fast Like a Girl, was that if a woman is in the part of her cycle where estrogen is low and she has a trauma hit her, estrogen is neuroprotective of the brain. So the trauma is going to impact her brain in a deeper level than, let's say, it happened while she was ovulating or when estrogen was high.
Wow.
So now she meanders into her therapist's office trying to unpack a trauma. But did we ever look at where her estrogen level was when that trauma occurred? And we don't have enough information. I mean, these are all questions that women are asking, and this is starting to bubble up. But how it's going to have a deeper effect and from a neuron standpoint, from a memory standpoint in that brain, because it happened when estrogen is low. This is not happening. This discussion is not happening in healthcare. And so women are being left out of a really detailed way to approach her health. They don't understand themselves. The doctor doesn't understand them. The system doesn't support this level of conversation that you and I are having.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah.
Are there apps that you recommend to women to better get a wrangle on their on like where they are in their cycle and the changing hormonal milieu that occurs throughout the month?
Yeah, there's a lot. The one that I used for many years when my cycle was regular was a Clue app, where you can just start to track your hormones and see where you're at. What I liked about Clue is they actually show you like a circle, and then it shows you like how you might feel. Like all of a sudden you might have more brain fog, or you might feel like you don't want to work out. And when I looked at that app, I thought, oh my God, I should give this to my staff. I should give this to my husband. Like I should just email everybody or text everybody. Here's where I am in my cycle. This is what you can expect from me because hormonally, this is what I'm going through. So I like that app. We did just come up with an app for Fast Like a Girl where a woman can go in and put the day of her cycle and it'll tell you what foods to eat, what supplements you might want to take, and what appropriate length fast would be best for you. I built out the algorithm on that because I really wanted women to also see that your hunger changes, your extroversion and introversion changes. So all of that is being recorded and mapping out with a woman's cycle so she knows how to course correct according to her lifestyle.
Yeah, interesting. What about, we talk a lot about bio-individuality on this show. And of course, I mean, this is such a relevant conversation, the gender differences, how one might react to fasting given, one's gender. But what about body composition? Because I know that people have different benefits to gain, or there might be potential an increase in various risks, for example, like the potential loss of lean mass, depending on one's, say, body fat percentage when initiating a more, an extended fast or even maybe shorter term fasts. I don't know. What does the research say there?
On what is a woman supposed to have more body fat? Give me more context.
Well, I feel that I've read that people that have more weight to lose, they risk losing lean mass less so than a lean person initiating a fast. There's, I believe I read that there's like a hypothetical amount of calories that can be extracted for a single pound of fat over a 24-hour period.
Right.
So the more overweight a person is, the more not only the longer can they fast, but the more extreme of a calorie deficit, just when we're talking about calories, right? Can they withstand before having to worry about a loss of lean mass?
Yes.
Because when dieting or fasting, lean mass is obviously the last thing that we want to lose, right?
Yeah, of course. Okay, so there's a lot to unpack on this question. In the most basic sense, what women should think about when they want to lose weight using something like keto, using something like fasting, is that everything has to be cycled for us. Even our workouts, even if we decide we're going to go on a calorie deficit diet and we're going to spend an hour at the gym every day, we should not be doing that all month long. Because once we do it, what you're saying is what happens is we can lose weight, we're going to tank our hormones, but what we're also going to do is break down muscle. So everything has to be cycled for us, and it has to be cycled on a monthly basis. Now, when we look at the studies on, like, let's use autophagy as an example. There's a lot of theory about, well, when you stimulate it into autophagy, the body starts to break muscle down, okay? And then you're left with less muscle as a woman. The challenge with that isolation of that statement is that when you go into autophagy, the idea is to get rid of the old. You're trying to break the muscle down. Of course, that's what you're supposed to do because then the muscle is going to build itself stronger. That's what you do when you pick up a set of weights. You're stressing the muscle so it breaks down and it builds itself up stronger. But if you stayed in autophagy all month long, then yeah, you would lose muscle mass. But if you cycle autophagy in and out, you clean that muscle out and it builds itself stronger. You come back in with maybe a more carb-rich diet and you start to give the glucose resources that muscle needs. So again, you asked, like, why did I start to talk about this around women and fasting? You can apply it to everything that we're supposed to do because we're seeing where women are falling apart. Their health is falling apart when we take these strong statements and we say, hey, no fasting, you're going to break down muscle, you're going to lose lean body mass. And the little asterisk is, yes, if you do it all the time.
If you do it all the time. Yeah, because people that are, for example, bodybuilders will, we know in fitness, like generally, if you're trying to lose body fat, it's more advantageous to use a smaller calorie deficit to preserve the lean mass. Like when somebody chooses to cut down, diet, whatever terminology you want to use. If you have less fat mass to lose. But for somebody who's more overweight, they generally can do, like a more rapid weight loss. And I think know that like it's less likely that they'll lose muscle mass in the process.
Yeah. The thing on calories that I think needs to also really be highlighted here, and why calorie. I mean, I don't know where your audience is on the conversation of calories, but
let's talk about it.
Yeah, like Jason Fung was really the first one to say to us, "Hey, if you bring your calories down and you work out more, you change your set point." And so what that means is, let's use a real life example, that when a woman decides to eat 1,000 calories a day because she's going to go on a diet, and then she decides to exercise 500 calories output a day, she's now created this set point where her body, in order to lose weight, it has to have this 500 calorie delta. Okay, she'll lose weight for a short period of time, but the minute she starts to eat maybe 1,500 calories and she doesn't work out that day, now she's gained weight. So we've got to move calories out of the conversation. Now, the only place that I see calories relevant to women specifically is with the thyroid. So when we look at thyroid health, and this was another like consequence of women fasting too much, is the thyroid needs calories to be higher in order to function normally. So we can't be bringing calories down, output up. If we're at a delta of 500 calories in a woman day after day after day, not only is she stuck at that set point, not only if she goes above that calorie intake is she going to gain weight, but she's going to tank her thyroid. And women around 45, we see a loss of over 50% of thyroid hormones when a woman hits 45.
It's super common.
Super common.
Yeah, I mean, a woman who's like only first of all, 1,000 calories a day, that's so low.
It is low.
And then she's burning 500 calories in this hypothetical scenario via exercise. Yep. She's only getting 500 calories.
Yeah.
That to me sounds A, miserable, B, totally unsustainable, B, a recipe for tanking one's health.
That's right. Yeah. But this is what we've done. This is the dieting culture, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and women, when you go back to this idea of like, why are women suffering at the hands of healthcare more? Well, in general, we've been dieting more. And so we've been operating off this calorie in, calorie out principle, and it's been destroying us. One of the big premises that I try to teach is, if you're a vegan, if you're carnivore, if you like a food style, amazing. Like, find love in food. Food should be healing. Food should be nourishing. And then take whatever your love of food is, as long as it's healthy food, and start to play with the fasting window. Look at your 24-hour day and say, okay, I've got this 6-hour window. Like, today's a great example. I probably won't eat till about 3 o'clock this afternoon. So then once I open up my eating window from 3 to 7, I'll make sure I get enough calories. I'll enjoy food. But what's happened is we've been bouncing from diet to diet to diet and going, it's carbs, it's no carbs, it's calories, it's no calories, it's vegan, it's carnivore. And that discussion where has it gotten us? We're more obese. We have more hormonal problems. We have more mental health problems. I strongly feel that discussion has to end, especially for women, because it is damaging our health. And the only way we end it is by embracing an incredible respect for food as a healing tool, and by matching that with what your body innately wants to do, which is go a certain period of time without food so it can heal itself. That's the solution.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. So what are the different types of fasting like protocols? Like what would you, where do we even begin? Because I feel like that we talk about time restricted eating, we talk about intermittent fasting. There are some men in the health and wellness space with large platforms that advocate for prolonged fasting, multi-day water fasts.
Yep.
There are others who I think are insane, who promote dry fasts.
Right. Yep.
So like, there's so many different like options that can, I feel like for your average viewer listener feel overwhelming. Where does one begin? Yeah,
it's such a good question. The dry fast, I smile because I put a couple of videos about dry fasting on YouTube. And I really was clear, like the research that we are seeing is 12 to 24 hours. And the only example that we have of successful dry fasting done repetitively is during Ramadan. And we have great research from that. And so all of us, what the my YouTube audience took from that is, oh, wait, I can accelerate my fasting results by dry fasting more. And all of a sudden they started dry fasting 2 days, 3 days. And I literally had to go do a video and be like, stop dry fasting so long because that's dangerous. So
wow.
I just want to point that out because
dry fasting, just for people who have never heard the term, it's going without water.
It's going without water or
what
food.
could possibly be the benefit of that?
Your body,
water has no calories.
Yeah, but your body has to go find water, and so it burns fat to find water.
Interesting.
So it's an accelerated way to get into the fat burning state. If you do it just for 12 hours, you actually will get into the fat burning state quicker. You'll get a deeper ketone experience. And so again, we're a culture of if a little bit's good, a lot's better. And so, but you shouldn't be going more than 24 hours in that state.
That is, I've never heard that before. And that is super interesting. And I'm not endorsing anybody go out and try this, but we did have Richard Johnson, who's a medical doctor, nephrologist, expert in fructose metabolism and uric acid. And he brought that up, that fat is actually a way that we store. I hope I'm not mischaracterizing this, but it's a way that we store water, essentially, right?
We actually store everything in fat. This is like a paradigm I'm trying to switch to, which is when we look, and especially as women, when we look in the mirror and we see the places that we have fat on, there is a whole message in our brain that shows up. I'm undisciplined, I'm not pretty, I'm not enough, the guilt, the shame that shows up when we look at fat. But when we actually break down what fat is doing, it's saving our life. So the body is so intelligent that what it says is, okay, I have extra estrogen or extra hormones, insulin's being one of them. I've got water that I've got to store. I've got glyphosate. I've got BPA plastic. I've got heavy metals. Where am I going to store this? Okay, it's not good to put it in an organ because it's going to shut the organ down. So let me find another resource to put this excess in, and it stores it in fat.
Wow.
So we have to redefine fat too. We have to and I'm really speaking to the women because there's so much guilt and shame around carrying extra weight. And then we also have there's a new movement of like extra weight, is okay. And I'm not here to debate either one of those. I'm just saying, can we stop looking at fat as I'm pretty or I'm not pretty? Can we see it was your brilliant body trying to store something it didn't know what to do with? Now let's try to work with the body to see what it can do to release that.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's like the body's walk-in closet.
Right. Yeah, there we go.
When you're checking out homes, like you want a bigger walk-in closet. So too does evolution realize that many years ago, right? Millennia ago. Yeah. Okay. So dry fasting, that's very interesting, but that's, I think, a more niche, fringe, like, I don't know. Like that's not something that I intend on trying anytime soon. But
yeah, no. And I just wanted to bring it up because you said dry fasting. I thought, okay, we got to make sure we unpack this.
It is super interesting. I definitely want to look into it.
Yeah.
But what are the more common protocols that are out there?
So in Fast Like a Girl, I map out 6 different length fasts. And I chose these because of 2 things. This is where the science was. So in these 6 length fasts, I wanted to show that we had science supporting it. And then one of the unique things that I've had is I've been teaching fasting on my YouTube channel for so long that I just started to see a commonality in the comments. And I asked my audience for years, give me feedback how these fasts are working for you. And so these are tried and true. And here are the 6. The first is intermittent fasting. This is what most people are doing. It's around 13 to 15 hours. You get the testosterone for men, you get growth hormone, and you switch over into fat burning. You'll burn a little fat, make a little ketones, feel kind of good. That's what typically people are doing. Inflammation will start to come down. At 17 hours, you stimulate autophagy. Now, this one's really interesting because your body's so intelligent that when it senses 17 hours of a bout has gone by without the blood sugar going up, so no food, what it does is it says, I have to make myself stronger. because we are in a crisis situation. So I need to rise to that crisis. It is the perfect example of hormetic stressors. Hormetic stress is a good stress. So the cell turns within, it pushes out bacteria, it pushes out viruses, it cleans up the parts so the mitochondria gets repaired, the endoplasmic reticulum, which are the proteins of the cell, get repaired. You can actually start to see genes turn off. If that cell is a cancer cell or an aging cell, the intelligence goes, okay, we got to get rid of this. This is not good for our survival. We need to get this bad cell out of us. So that 17-hour mark is when autophagy clicks in, and it will stay high until 72 hours. It peaks at the 72-hour mark of no food. So that to me is this is where longevity comes in. If you take Bruce Lipton's work where he explains that thoughts are on the outside of our cells, if we have bad patterns of thoughts and the intelligence decides this is a cell that needs to go, you're also going to be getting rid of some of those old negative thought patterns, which is why people who fast longer build what I call a fasting lifestyle. They start to see that their behaviors towards food changes, that their outlook on life changes, because you're getting rid of all these bad cells that no longer serve you both physically and mentally.
I wonder if that's why every religious tradition that I can think of has integrated throughout time some form of fasting.
Absolutely. I also think you clear the noise. Like the longer you fast, your thoughts go from like this wide perspective of like constantly chattering to you. And if you go into like a 2 or 3 day water fast, those thoughts quiet down. And you can finally get to the root core of maybe how you feel or a problem you're trying to solve. So when you add that to a spiritual belief, I think that's between that and the long-term change is pretty profound.
Super interesting.
Yeah.
Circling back to women. So just again, as a reminder, you would only want to consider anything like this during the first 10 days.
You got it. Well, there's 2 phases. I call them in the book power phases because you can power up on all your biohacking tools. And that goes from day 1 to day 10 of your menstrual cycle. And then we have another little blip after ovulation, which is about day 16, day 15. Every woman does this differently, to day 19. So there's another like 4-day period where you could go into the longer fast I'm talking about.
Between ovulation and menstruation?
That's right. The week before your period, which is really your premenstrual time. We call it the luteal phase. Which we can talk about in a moment, because that's really where the fasting game needs to change for women, is that week before her cycle.
Interesting.
So we call it premenstrual. It's clinically called the luteal phase. I called it in the book the nurture phase because I feel like we really need to nurture ourselves during that time. But you wouldn't take an autophagy length fast and throw that in during ovulation, and you wouldn't throw it in that week before your period.
If you're, fasting during premenstrual, like PMS, like, isn't that just going to make you a nightmare to be around?
Yep. Amen.
Like I don't think, who's endorsing that? Yeah, who wants to do that?
Okay, but the woman who's trying to desperately lose weight doesn't realize that, and she's just doing the old philosophy of like, let me just put my head down and I'm going to fast, I'm going to lose weight, I'm going to do it all month long. And she doesn't realize that this part, she's
going to be miserable.
She's going to be miserable herself, and she's going to be miserable to other people. So let's not do that. But if you look at what happens that week before our period, progesterone's coming in. And progesterone, anytime cortisol is high, progesterone is going to become shy. She goes away. So this is if you are working out too hard the week before your period, if you have too much at work the week before your period, we're going to start to see some massive changes in her cycle because progesterone's out. Progesterone's like, I'm not hanging around here because cortisol's on the scene. The other wicked combination for fasting during this time is you become actually naturally more insulin resistant the week before your cycle. Okay, well, let's think about that for a moment. Every woman on the planet would once she understands why that is, would say, yep, this is me. We crave more carbs during the week before our period. We often crave chocolate. We want to sit on the couch. We're not as motivated. We're a little more introverted that week before because we need glucose to be higher in order to make progesterone. If glucose is low, cortisol is high, you've got a woman who's going to skip her cycle. You've got an anxious woman because she's working in opposition of what progesterone needs. And then the chocolate one is interesting because what progesterone needs is magnesium.
Oh, and chocolate is loaded with magnesium, right?
Loaded with magnesium. And she craves carbs because her body wants her to bring glucose up. So we can lean into like your work and go, okay, so we need glucose to be higher, but I'm looking at the ketogenic diet. It's done wonders for me. I've lost weight all month long, but now I'm the week before my period. I'm hungry. I just want to eat. I can't stay disciplined. Okay, well, let's look at good food. Let's look at nature's carbs. Let's get away from the processed carbs. Let's go into the sweet potatoes. Let's go into the tropical fruits. Let's go into the citrus fruits, like the legumes, where those can fit in at that time. And that's where we're going to now get progesterone high and be able to get a normal cycle. And then once your cycle starts, okay, now let's go back into more of your keto low carb lifestyle.
Is that what you're on? Are you on like a more low carb keto
diet? I do more low carb. But as I've gone through menopause, I've had to mind progesterone a little bit more. So if I get anxious or I'm not sleeping well, I switch over because, as a menopausal or in that transition, my periods are not predictable. So I use my symptoms. And if I feel like those things I just mentioned, I'm not sleeping, I'm anxious, my brain isn't as clear as I want it, I'm lethargic, I'm feeling like I want to withdraw from people, I switch over into my sweet potatoes and my potatoes and I bring my glucose up. And then once I kind of ride that course, I go, okay, now I want to go back into low keto to get coming here today. Last night I made sure that I had a really good balanced meal of, great greens, grass-fed steak and a little bit of a sweet potato.
Yum.
Right?
It's like a perfect meal for me.
Oh my gosh. And then I lathered it with some grass-fed butter. And knowing that mental performance the next day was high on my list, I eat the night before in accordance with what my hormones would need. But we're not doing that either. I don't think most women do. Do you think about that? Like, let me eat a certain way to perform the next day?
Well, it's mainly let me not eat something that I think is going to make me pay any kind of digestive penalty the next day.
Okay.
If I'm going to be like running around out of my house, like going on different podcasts, I want to eat something that I know just reacts well to my body, I'm trying to think of like, my diet's generally pretty clean, but just like something that's like in my wheelhouse of like, I know how that is going to make me feel from a digestive standpoint, mainly. Cognitively, I feel like I'm pretty, the morning of, if I need to be sharp, either I'll fast or I'll eat, generally like a low carb meal just to make sure that my blood sugar is not going to be sending me on any kind of like weird roller coaster. But that's pretty much it. I don't really think about the night before meal so much. Yeah.
So now let's expand that out to a woman's life. And she can start to look at her food to support the hormonal health that she's got at different times of the month to get the benefit. Like when we look at hormonal health, hormones are a superpower. For both men and women, we just have a few extra ones. And so how do we start to build food into that conversation? If we just go simply, front half of your cycle, go low carb. Back half of your cycle, go into nature's carbs and bring up the nature's carbs. And now we've got the rhythm that our hormones need to have, and it's going to show up in our relationships. It's going to show up in how we perform at the gym. It's going to show up in, at work. Whereas what are we doing in general? We're just eating for our taste buds. So we're not even choosing good food. I know you know this very well, but then let's expand that conversation into, okay, women, let's also look at the hormones in the food conversation.
So what are any potential consequences of eating higher carb during the earlier phase of one cycle?
A great example of this are two major problems that are happening to women, PCOS and infertility.
PCOS is super common.
Super common. So let's unpack PCOS. It is insulin resistance mixed with toxicity. And so I don't know a better tool for insulin resistance than low carb fasting lifestyle. Like if you want to nail that, like let's start to address that and do it in the front half of the cycle as estrogen is building. What we've seen in our online world is that you can really bring down the symptoms of PCOS if you know your cycle, if you have a cycle. I know women who have PCOS, they don't all have cycles that are apparent. They're cycling. They just don't have blood to show when the start and the stop is. So that front half of the cycle, let's make sure we can lean in and make you more insulin resistant. And I don't know a better tool for that than fasting and eating right.
Wow.
Same thing with infertility. Infertility is at like the highest rates possible right now. And it's a men and woman problem. But what we've seen in our community is that when we use these moments of low hormones or use the moments where estrogen is building and put a woman into a fasting state, get her into the fat burning energy system, and then put her back into higher carbs and let her focus on her microbiome during ovulation, now we can actually regulate her cycle and she can get pregnant. We have seen this prior to the book coming out. I had 5 patients, and it's not a big, this is an observational study, if you call it a study. It's not a big sample size, but I asked 5 patients who had trouble getting pregnant. A year or longer is what they need to do, and they had to have been told they couldn't get pregnant because they had a high BMI or because they were obese, which is a really classic thing right now. Is a woman walks in to her doctor's office and he says, well, you can't get pregnant because your BMI is high.
Wow.
And that's it. Just lose weight and you'll get pregnant. So what we did is we took these women through what I call my fasting cycle, and I showed them how to fast and eat for their hormones. I was like, give it 90 days and then we'll course correct and see what we need to do. Every single one of those women was pregnant within 1 month.
Wow.
It blew me away. Now, I would love to see a bigger study on this. This is my own weird little observational, lens that I saw. I've asked women who have now read Fast Like a Girl, like, please give me feedback if you notice that your cycle is coming back and you are becoming more fertile. But that's just all that is a woman living and eating in accordance with her hormones. And when we look at PCOS and infertility, at the root cause of that are women that have not been taught how to live in accordance with her hormones.
Why do you think we're seeing so much infertility today?
Well, toxicity is also, that's also the other side of the equation of PCOS. We're living the most toxic time in human history. And toxins are going to go to endocrine organs. So they're going to go to the thyroid, they're going to go to the ovaries, they're going to go to the brain, the hypothalamus, and the pituitary. They're going to affect the adrenals. So it throws our whole endocrine system off when we have a high toxic load. But that's only half the story. The other part is cortisol is destroying all of our hormones, men and women. In the book, I wrote something called the hormonal hierarchy, where we can't just throw out the word hormones and expect that all hormones have equal value in our bodies. We have to understand that anytime cortisol is on the scene, the body clicks into the state where it thinks it's running from a tiger. And when a woman's body, I'll just keep it there, is running from a tiger, there is no need to reproduce and have a baby. That is not on and there's no need to burn fat. The only thing it wants to do is get away from the tiger. So what it does is when cortisol is high, it makes you more insulin resistant. When you become more insulin resistant, now you're going to throw your sex hormones off. That's the hierarchy. But what I try to highlight, and I've been really trying to highlight this in the world right now because I think it's such a pivotal message that we need to get across, is if you want to bring cortisol down, because it's crazy the stress level that women have right now. There's one hormone you got to tap into, and that's oxytocin. And oxytocin has a half-life of a couple of minutes. It's not going to last a long time in your system. But the best thing you can do is start to create connection with other humans. Surround yourself with people who are positive and lift you up. I'm a hugger. Hug more people. Pet your animals. We can get oxytocin in so many places. Smile at the person at the grocery store, the stranger. Start being kinder to other people and to yourself. Every single one of those moments where we move into compassion and we move into connection, we elevate oxytocin. And when oxytocin goes up, cortisol goes down. When cortisol goes down, insulin, now you have a door in to make yourself insulin sensitive. And when you are insulin sensitive, now we can get to your sex hormones. But if I'm 30 years old, 35 years old, and I'm struggling to go get pregnant and I walk into my OB's office, I'm going to be told either lose weight or let me put you on some medications. And that whole conversation we just had is never addressed.
Wow.
That's why we have such high infertility rates.
Wow. So it's the chronic stress. It's the lack of connection.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oxytocin, the love and connection hormone.
Yeah.
The more we can increase that, the lower we can get our cortisol.
That's right.
But cortisol is, there is one point in the day where cortisol is naturally, physiologically meant to be elevated, right?
Yeah. So this is another great point. Cortisol peaks around an hour to 2 hours after you wake up in the morning. So use it. Cortisol is meant to be used, and it's meant to make you move. So the function of cortisol is so that you get up out of the chair, get up off of the couch, and you go and you move. Think about our primal ancestors. They had to wake up with the sun and go find food. So we got a cortisol spike to motivate us to go find food. So are you exercising in the morning? That's the best time to exercise. Use that cortisol. Whatever you don't use of cortisol, you will store. And you store it as belly fat primarily.
Wow.
Now, let's extrapolate that into other times. What if you get a cortisol spike at 5 p.m? Okay, get up and move. Go for a walk. Do some jumping jacks. If you can't go somewhere, do some squats. Do some burpees. Just use that cortisol. Otherwise, it's going right to your belly. It's going to be stored right as fat, primarily in the belly, which is like the place that everybody wants to not have it. And then, are you getting out in the middle of the day and going for a walk if you're in a high stress job? Or are you just sitting at your desk and allowing the stress to keep coming at you? So we don't really know how to use cortisol, but yet we throw it around like, oh, cortisol is the enemy of health. It is. But why don't we learn to work with cortisol and get out of the conversation of stop stressing, just stop stressing. It's not that simple. I don't know about you, but I've had stressful times in my life where I know I need to stop stressing. I'm pulling every tool out, and it's really hard to stop stressing. So I use movement. I get up, I walk, I move around to try to use that cortisol so it doesn't turn into fat, doesn't soak my brain cells, it doesn't damage my body.
Yeah, there are definitely moments in life that are inevitably stressful.
Yeah.
Like a loved one gets sick, you're in a job that's just become stressful and you can't find a way out. You need to pay the bills.
Yep.
You're in a relationship that's gone sour, or maybe there's a phase in the relationship that that is that's agitating to some degree. There's a lot. You get called, you got to go jury duty, go to the DMV for whatever. So life is full of these like inevitabilities, and it's very useful to be able to have something like exercise.
Yeah. To
be able to channel that cortisol to something productive.
Yeah. We need free tools. This is why I love fasting, and partly why I love food too. Is like, let's just go back to the basics. Like, we've gotten really complicated with health. It started off as this complication around like, oh, you've got this symptom. Here's your fancy diagnosis. Here's your pill, or here's your fancy surgery. And then we've sort of have this biohacking movement where everybody is like, okay, well, let me jump in a cold plunge. Let me get. I love hyperbaric oxygen is one of my favorite biohacks. Or let me get in front of some red light. And so then that's really, all that stuff's really cool. But what do we do with the person who can't afford that stuff? What do we do with the single mom who's working 2 jobs and is just trying to keep her head above water? What do we do with the teacher? The teacher, I come from a family of teachers, and, they work so hard for such little money and they have such little time. How are we going to help her get healthy? Well, this is where I look at like, okay, how is she moving? Is she fasting? What is she going to do for food? How do we help her with cost-effective foods? We got to come back to simplicity and not overcomplicate health, because once we do, we leave so many people out of the health conversation.
I couldn't agree more. It's super important to be mindful of accessibility, like access when we have these conversations, and the fact that it's really not a level playing field for people. The people live in food deserts. There's inequities across the board.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But going back to fasting, I think a lot has been made. One thing that I hear come up again and again, especially with regard to these like prolonged fasts, like a 72-hour fast, is the value of electrolytes, the necessity of electrolytes.
Yeah.
Aside from drinking water during one of these fasts, is there anything that we need to be mindful of with regard to electrolytes?
Yeah. So this was really interesting to me when I first started teaching on YouTube. We would do these things called Fast Training Week, where I would take a 5-day period every month, and we would just practice as a community, a worldwide community. We would practice these different length fasts. And what I discovered was that people started getting like heart palpitations. We had primarily women, but we had a lot of people like losing hair. We had people trouble sleeping. Some aches and pains showed up in the fasted state. And what I realized is that we can pretty much assume right now that the whole world is mineral deficient, based off of the lack of nutrients in our soils. You know, unless you're making a conscious effort to eat from a regenerative farm and have a really good balanced diet, you are mineral deficient. Now you add the stress conversation that we just had around, you know, how stressful life is, that's depleting of you of minerals. So with those two things in mind, we come to a 72-hour fast, we come to a longer fast, and all of a sudden we get these crazy symptoms. And really at the root of it is electrolytes, minerals, amino acids is another one. And so what I started doing was encouraging people to throw in some mineral packs, throw in some aminos in your fasted state. And now let's see how your body feels in that fasted state. And it was like 80% of people's symptoms went away. Interesting.
But amino acids are protein. So, right?
They fit in a different category. So yes. So with aminos, this is getting really nuanced. So I'll go down that road, but I don't want to lose people. When you get 20 grams or more of protein in one sitting, you turn off autophagy. So if I go into a fast and I'm wanting to keep autophagy high to clean my cells up, and I take a scoop of aminos, if that scoop has 20 grams of protein in it, it'll tell you on your packet, it's pulling you out of autophagy or we think it is. I've had a lot of discussions with fasting experts on this, and we're not completely clear. But this is where I stand on it, is that it's going to diminish your autophagy results if you put that amino acid in your fasting window. So what I like to do is let's put the aminos in your eating window, preparing you for tomorrow's fast so that we have enough aminos, because we know aminos make neurotransmitters. We know they make hormones. So we need to keep your amino level high, but let's just go ahead and put it into your eating window is at best. Or if you want it in your fasting window, it may keep you in ketosis, but it may pull you out of autophagy. Which is, again, we're deep in the conversation now.
Is that because the 20 grams is hypothetically you're hitting the leucine threshold?
Yeah.
So you're activating mTOR.
You switch over to mTOR, exactly.
Interesting. So wait, your feeding window, we're talking about intermittent fasting here.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Or okay, let's use a 3-day water fast. Do you want to go into a 3-day water fast? I would power up on your aminos before you go in, because your reserves are going to be strong. And now you can go into that fast and you're going to feel better mentally and physically. But during the actual fast, you can bring the electrolytes in.
Got it.
Because that's not going to pull you out of a fasted state. And that's not going to affect autophagy.
Right.
It's only going to bring in some minerals so that you enjoy the experience a little more.
Got it. And so when it comes to electrolytes, what are we talking about? Are we talking about putting like a little bit of salt in your water?
Yeah.
Or do you use like I'm personally a huge fan of Element.
Yeah.
I use Element all the time. But is it something like that? I mean, Element also has like flavors in most of their, in most of their varieties. So it's like, what are we specifically talking about?
Yeah, Elements is a big one. So let's break it down. What's in Element is magnesium, potassium, and sodium. So those are nutrients you need in a fasted state. And actually, Rob developed Element for fasters.
Oh, interesting.
It was originally developed for fasters, which is really interesting because we use it for a lot of other things. Also, do you know that his mango chili and lemon habanero was meant to be a mixer?
Oh, I did not know that.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I figured this out because all of a sudden my college-age kids started taking all my Element. And I was like, what are they doing? And then I realized, they're using it for like a hangover. And then I brought it to Rob and he's like, oh yeah, that's why we made those two was as a mixer for drinks.
That checks out. That's
Isn't that
funny. I love to use Element. I feel like if I feel sometimes, even the most subtle onset of a migraine, which I don't get very frequently, especially not anymore, but I occasionally will get them. Element really does help with that. Yeah.
Well, if you look at just potassium's needed by the brain, it's needed by the muscles, and magnesium's needed. I mean, it is arguably the most important nutrient that we can get in our body, both men and women, not only for hormone production, but for brain health, muscle production. So that would make perfect sense. Sodium's interesting, and I know you have some thoughts on sodium, but one of the things that I really wrestled with when I looked at Element as a resource for my community in this fasted state was like, well, what do we do with the people with high blood pressure? If sodium causes high blood pressure, which there's a lot of speculation that that's not even accurate. But the best way to address the sodium issue is to bring it in when insulin is low. So again, we're back at a nuanced conversation that's not happening. So if you're concerned about the sodium in it, but you're putting it into your fasting window, that concern, all the studies that were ever done or ever shown that sodium created high blood pressure, which sugar does it even more, were done in the presence of high insulin, high glucose. But with fasting, what we're doing is we're regulating that system and we're putting you in a glucose deficit and we're bringing down insulin. When we bring sodium in, now you can actually see the magic of how sodium is supposed to work.
Yeah, because as far as I know, insulin tells insulin, which is elevated, you depress insulin essentially when you're fasted, and insulin causes the body to hold on to sodium.
That's right.
Right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So when you're in a fasted state, your body's just not very efficient at holding onto sodium. No. So you hypothetically, I guess, you would have a higher tolerance for it.
That's right.
Before you would see any impact on blood pressure.
And your cells will use it differently. In the presence of insulin, it's going to block that sodium out from the cells. But when insulin's low, now the cell it's a necessary nutrient. It's an incredibly important nutrient, specifically for muscles and like relaxing muscles, which, if we look at the migraine, it's not only blood flow to the brain, but it can be like, tight muscles that have caused that blood flow to be restricted.
Yeah. Migraines are super complex.
They are. They're very complex.
I've been on my own like migraine journey for the past year. It was about a year ago. Yeah. About a year ago that I was like diagnosed, I would get occasional headaches, but it took me, I guess like 39 years to figure out that those headaches that I was occasionally getting were called migraines.
Yeah. Do you get like the ocular whole experience?
No, I don't get like aura or anything like that. Yeah. But it is like typically on one side towards the front of my head, and it's difficult. I guess with migraines, it really does help to like journal about them to see what the various triggers are, because they could be different for everybody.
Totally
there's like for some dark chocolate, red wine. I could drink red wine and not have any migraine. Like it's like
you're lucky.
Yeah, it's not the most predictable thing for me. I mean, I think like sleep is involved, but like it's the kind of thing where I will wake up. I can actually almost feel its onset before I go to sleep. And then I wake up, I have a migraine, and it lasts all day for the most part until either I exercise. A lot of the time I can just exercise and it goes away. Although sometimes I get like, I'll feel like the onset of like an exertion headache depending on the exercise. But usually that doesn't turn into a full-blown migraine. But so yeah, usually I'll have a migraine until I exercise or go to sleep. And then, so it oftentimes will last like 24 hours. And then occasionally I get them from flying. Flying headaches are a real thing.
Yeah.
The pressure,
So what's interesting about migraines is there's two phases that are completely different to it. So the first phase can actually be the constriction of blood flow. And that's where you start to feel like it's coming on. But that can be followed by the blood vessels opening up and you get a flood of blood flow. So it's sometimes catching it at that moment, if you can find the trick to catch it before it goes into a full migraine, is really critical. So our son gets ocular migraines a lot. And we've played with this so much where I'm like, okay, because with an ocular migraine, you actually will go like, you can't see. You like go blind. And so he can't do anything except lie down until it goes away. And so we've played with that critical transition moment. And this is where something like Element has really helped. We've also put him in hyperbaric.
Yeah, Element does help me. And I know that I have a commercial affiliation with them, but I'm being totally honest. I will have it especially when I'm traveling, because I know one occasional trigger for me is flying.
Yep.
Element definitely helps. And I'm not just saying that, like it does,
Yeah,
it's the electrolytes, and I feel like it definitely provides a therapeutic effect.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely agree.
I've never shared this on the podcast, but a year ago, so what began my migraine journey, I developed Horner syndrome. Are you familiar with Horner's?
Years ago, I learned about it. Tell me more of how it expressed for you.
Well, I haven't shared photos of this or anything like that, but I flew to Austin. It was like a year ago. It was like January of 2022. And the day of my flight, because I told you like my flying is associated with migraine for me. I didn't have a migraine during the flight, but that night I was at dinner and my right eyelid basically sunk to half mast. And I called up a friend of mine, a neurologist, and he was like, you should go to the emergency room. And while I was on the phone with him, it resolved itself. It was super weird. I had like my eyelid was like at half mast, and then within 20 minutes, it went back to normal. But then 4 days later, when I was flying back to LA from Austin, mid-flight, it happened again, and it didn't resolve for about 2 months. It slowly got better, but Horner syndrome, the triad of symptoms classically associated with Horner syndrome, is ptosis, meiosis, and anhidrosis, which is like an inability to sweat on that side of the face. It's all ipsilateral, like on that side. The pupil is affected, the eyelid is affected. And those 2 months, I was actually behind the scenes, unbeknownst to nobody but like my family and my immediate friends. I was in the emergency room a few times. I was like to rule out these really bad things that could otherwise cause Horner's.
Right.
Like it's a diagnosis by, exclusion. Like you want to make sure that you don't have like a brain tumor.
I was just going to say you probably went to brain tumor first.
Yeah. I got my head scanned. I got, made sure that I had no carotid dissection, which can occur with like, neck manipulation. What was the other thing? A mass in the lung. So we had to rule out all these freaking things. And then the best case scenario was that it would be that it can sometimes be associated with migraine, which it turns out that's what it was for me,
Interesting.
And I still technically have it, but the symptoms have completely gone away. Yeah. So I can test it by putting aproclonidine drops in my eyes. It makes the pupil dilate. But yeah, super weird.
It's scary. That's probably scary.
I was pretty scared. Yeah, I was at first. I was scared. I was like, I have a brain tumor. This is it for me. But we ruled out all those things. I had a great like medical team that was awesome. Like supporting me. And you can actually go to my Instagram. There's like back January, February of 2018. Some of the things are posted like out of temporal context that I post on my Instagram. But generally, there's like a few clips where you can actually like kind of see that my eyelid was like not functioning properly. Yeah. It's very weird. And I still technically like, it doesn't go away to my knowledge. Yeah. So wild.
Yeah. Super scary.
Yeah. It's crazy. We're so complex.
We are so complex. And what I was thinking is that we give these fancy labels to these really complex conditions that happen in our body. And we have a little bit of like, okay, we labeled it. We're good. But yet how each person handles the treatment of that label has to be unique. And I think that this is something that's starting to approach or be talked about a lot more in healthcare, is that we've gone from a one size fits all to personalized approach. Yet that leaves a lot of responsibility on the individual to figure out what the personalized approach is to their healthcare, challenge. Mm-hmm. And I feel like this is, I call it the wild, wild west. We're a little bit in this wild, wild west moment where people are saying, okay, don't give me a diagnosis and the same solution you give everybody. I can go to the internet and I can interview, I can find all the things I need to find about how to handle my solution. But now I'm stuck with, shit, I got to put my own health puzzle together. And that's where things start to fall apart, I believe, right now.
Definitely, yeah. I mean, especially when you're in the midst of a potential health crisis, it's like, you are thrust into that fight or flight, hypervigilant state where, thinking like creatively about solutions, it just becomes like all you want is you're just in that hypervigilant state, and it's just hard to really think like rationally.
That's right.
Like a rational human being in those moments.
Yeah, right.
You become like a frightened animal.
Right. Yeah, and okay, so then let's talk about that. You have all this information, you have all these symptoms, you don't know the door out. And what's now happened is you're getting locked into the part of your brain that's the fight or flight brain, the amygdala. And so your problem solving abilities go way down.
Yeah.
So if you're locked in your amygdala, you're not operating from your prefrontal cortex. And so you got even another problem now. And that is our healthcare system, and why we have to start to be more preventative. We have to start creating new formulas. We have to get out of looking at like, if I have a symptom, I have a problem. And if I don't have a symptom, I must be healthy. I believe we got to change the whole paradigm for both men and women, because what we have done is completely broken, especially for chronic conditions. Now, if I lose an arm in an accident, take me to the emergency room. What they're doing there is amazing. But if I all of a sudden, can't get pregnant, or I have I have migraines that won't go away, now we don't have a good formula in place for people to step into and solve their own health problems.
Yeah. So what is the path forward? Self-education?
I think it's twofold. First, and please, as people are listening to this, take this with love. But your health is your responsibility. End of story. So if you don't love the body you're living in, change that. And that's going to be you researching what's right for you. So you can't sit back, like you're a great example. When you had Horner syndrome, you could have sat back and been like, oh, well, thank God that's over. You said, I created a team of people around me to help support me. So we take responsibility. We gather information, we get a team of doctors, health practitioners that support us. And then there's a little bit of trial and error. I'm sure you did this with Horner syndrome and with your migraines. Like, let me try this and see how this works. Okay, yeah, that worked. Okay, now let me add another layer to that. So, but none of that can happen if we don't take responsibility.
Yeah, absolutely. Today, I mean, we live in a time where there's so much victim mindset.
So much.
It's a big problem.
Yeah. Yeah.
There was that woman recently on a highly credentialed medical doctor from, I believe, Harvard, who, made the claim that that the primary cause of obesity is genetics. And so, I mean, that something like that just continues to foment this like, woe is me, like I'm so unlucky with the cards that I've been dealt. I mean, yeah, we discussed like equity, and inequality, that all exists. But at a certain point, you have to take your own life by the reins.
That's right. That's right. I think that we're coming out of this broken healthcare system. People are waking up to that. A new model has not emerged yet. So discussions like this, I hope, will deepen the way that people think of this. But when we look at the old model, even like my parents' age, my parents are in their 80s. If I look at what they were used to, they had a problem. They went to the doctor. The almighty doctor told them what the problem was, gave it a fancy name, gave them a pill. They walked away with the pill. If the pill doesn't work, they weren't like, oh, well, maybe there's something else I can do. They went back and went to the doctor and like, this pill doesn't work. It's the pill's responsibility. They do that enough times where the pill doesn't work, and eventually it's the doctor's problem. So we have been trained in a system that has told us it's either there's another solution outside of us. So to give us all a little more compassion and credibility, I want people to understand that is broken. That has to end for both men and women, but especially for women. Okay, so once we step into personal responsibility, you stop looking for absolutes. So diet's a great example. Let's stop saying, hey, the vegan diet's the best. Plant-based people are amazing and carnivore people are ruining the planet. No, there's no absolutes. We have to start to play with the different principles and the different pieces and then find our natural rhythm. That's going to take some time for humans to grab onto because we have been conditioned otherwise. Another perfect example of this is how many of us have been conditioned that happiness comes from outside. You know, if I have the right car, if I have the right house, I'll be happy. And how many of us have hit that point and had a surge of happiness only to find that our troubles have followed us there? So when we go for exogenous stimulation, when we give our power outside of us, that's when we mentally and physically start to crumble. But the minute we go inside and we understand ourselves, conversations like this, we understand what our body wants, our unique body, now we have a path into ending both mental and physical disease.
Absolutely. So well said. And circling back to fasting, do you think that fasting can help facilitate, I mean, in a way, as a microcosm, like a greater awareness for that in life, which can fulfill us?
Oh, 1,000%. So this is, again, why I'm so excited about fasting is it hits every single tool we need right now. So for starters, you're going to do it. I can sit here and I can tell you how to do it, but I'm not doing it for you. The pill is doing something for you. You're actually, when you fast, you're stepping out of your educated brain and you're saying, okay, body, I get that you're really intelligent and I'm gonna let you go to work. So we start to get to know ourselves differently. Then when we look at things like big food and big pharma and all the toxic pieces that we have, we're avoiding that. Then when we start to look at, even with diets, we can be like the diet or my trainer or my therapist, they were all the ones that healed me. No, not with fasting. With fasting, you heal yourself. And then we add on top of that the spiritual insight, the mental changes, the neurochemical changes. I just don't know a tool that can hit every single one of those markers, except maybe a hug.
Yeah. Going back to that oxytocin.
Hey, if you like that video, you need to check out this one here, and I'll see you there.
So when women get really stressed out, they notice they can't lose weight. They notice that they're really struggling with energy. And it's actually by nature's design to help you survive and help the tribe survive. So a lot of women are like, God, it sucks because here I am trying to fast and do keto, and I'm just not getting these results. I'm really struggling with my weight. I'm gaining weight maybe.